Learning to let go, a journey of love, loss, and personal growth. They say the worst part of losing someone isn't the moment they walk out. It's the silence that follows. But I didn't learn that until much later. When I first met Emma, there was nothing silent about her. She came into my life like a wave crashing against everything I had carefully arranged. My routines, my distance, my guarded emotions. She was bold in the way she laughed, loud in the way she lived, and unapologetically honest in the way she loved. I was drawn to that light, not realizing how much of my own darkness it illuminated. Back then, I worked at a publishing house, buried in manuscripts, always searching for meaning in other people's stories. My own life felt like a prologue with no beginning. I'd wake up to the same dull apartment, make the same coffee, take the same train, and go home to the same echo of emptiness. Until she sat next to me one evening in a subway car that had broken down for 10 minutes too long. We talked. About nothing at first, weather, broken transport, shared glances at other passengers. But by the time the train resumed, I felt like I had known her for years. She had this way of peeling away layers without you noticing. By the time I realized I was opening up, she was already inside. We didn't fall in love instantly. That would have been too easy. It was more like slowly stepping into water that keeps getting warmer, not realizing your neck, deep until it's too late to go back. She told me about her past in fragments. A father who vanished when she was 7. A mother who smiled too much to hide her sadness. Years of pretending to be okay. I listened because I was good at listening. She used to say I was the calm she never knew she needed. But what she didn't know was that I was calm because I was terrified of chaos, of change, of unpredictability, of anything that pulled me out of my mental checklist. And Emma was all of those things. For a while, I let her change me. My apartment grew warmer with her around. Literally and figuratively. There were throw pillows with silly quotes, a French press instead of my dusty kettle, art prints on walls that used to be bare. I started smiling more, started speaking more, started feeling more. She made me look at the world, not just read about it. But love, I've learned, doesn't just feed on laughter and shared songs. It tests you when no one's watching. And in that test, we both began to fail. It started with the small things, a missed call I forgot to return. Her frustration when I worked late again. My irritation when she brought up her feelings, like somehow they were an inconvenience I hadn't scheduled for. I wasn't good at confrontation. She wasn't good at silence. So she spoke louder and I retreated deeper. Our apartment became a battleground of glances and swallowed words. I used to think emotional distance was a safe place to hide. But when you're with someone who feels everything so deeply, that distance becomes a weapon. I remember one night, she sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in one of my shirts, her face unreadable. "Do you still love me?" she asked. It should have been a simple answer. But I hesitated, not because I didn't, but because I didn't know how to say it anymore without sounding rehearsed. I nodded. She didn't believe me. And that's when I realized love isn't just about the truth. It's about how that truth is delivered. The silence after that night was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was loaded. Every morning became a dance of avoidance. We stopped sharing meals. She stopped asking me about my day. I stopped pretending I had anything worth sharing. We were still under the same roof, but it felt like we were living in different timelines. I think we both hoped something would snap us back. A fight big enough to reset us. A moment tender enough to remind us. But nothing came. Only more silence and the slow decay of what once was everything. Then one evening she didn't come home. No text. No call. Just absence. At first I thought she was with a friend. Then maybe she needed space. But when midnight passed and my calls went straight to voicemail, I knew. She was gone. Not kidnapped, not harmed. Just gone from me. I found a note on the kitchen counter. "I waited for you to come back to me, but I realized you were never really here." That line hit me harder than anything else. Because it was true. I had never fully let her in. I had watched her love me with her whole being while I rationed mine like it was a currency I couldn't afford to spend. For days, I did nothing. I went to work, came home, stared at her empty corner of the bed, and waited for the pain to settle. It didn't. I deleted her number to stop myself from calling. Then I searched for it again, hoping I'd memorized it without realizing. I hadn't. My mind had forgotten, but my chest remembered. Every beat was a reminder of her laugh, her scent, her chaos. I started noticing traces of her everywhere. A strand of hair on the sink, her favorite book left on the armrest, the smell of her perfume on my hoodie. Absence is cruel like that. It decorates the mundane with memories. 3 weeks passed before I saw her again. By accident, or fate if you believe in such things. I was at the bookstore near my office, flipping through a poetry collection I had no intention of buying. She walked in with someone. A man. He looked like the kind of person who asks about your day and actually listens. They laughed, not the forced kind, but the laughter that starts in the belly and bubbles up through the eyes. She looked happy, and I hated that I wasn't the reason anymore. She saw me. Our eyes met for less than a second. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She didn't look away either. Just nodded, barely. It was the kind of acknowledgement that says, "You mattered." Once. That night I went home and finally cried. Not for her, but for myself. For the man who had everything and still chose to stay behind a wall. For the silence I thought was safety. For the words I never said when they mattered. I started writing again. Not just emails and edits, but real writing. About her, about me, about how sometimes love isn't loud. Sometimes it's a quiet promise to show up, even when you're scared, and how breaking that promise again and again turns love into loss. Emma taught me that love isn't something you fall into. It's something you build every day, brick by brick. And when you stop building, it collapses. Quietly, completely. I never reached out again. I didn't want to disturb her peace, now that she had found it. But I carry her in every story I edit, every walk I take alone, every silence I now fill with something other than fear. And maybe that's the twist life gave me. I lost her, but in that loss, I found the parts of me I had buried long before she ever arrived. She was never mine to keep. She was the mirror I needed. And now, every time I hear silence, I listen harder, because sometimes that silence speaks the loudest truths of all. I started frequenting the same subway line, at the same hour, sitting in the same spot where I first met her, like a ghost retracing the outline of a life that no longer existed. I wasn't hoping to see her again. Not exactly, but it became a ritual, a strange comfort in the repetition. People came and went, faces changed. But the seat beside me stayed empty more often than not, and in that vacancy I kept projecting her smile, her voice, the sound of her humming some old tune she probably didn't know the lyrics to. When I wasn't riding trains to nowhere, I buried myself in work. My colleagues noticed the change. Of course, they said I looked sharper, more focused, maybe even driven. But that wasn't clarity. That was anesthesia. Work numbed the edge just enough to make it through the day. I took on more manuscripts than I could handle, edited with a kind of manic precision, dissected words like they had wronged me. I told myself I was being productive. But in truth, I was hiding in someone else's narrative because mine had fallen apart. On weekends, I avoided friends. Their questions were too pointed, their sympathy too heavy. They looked at me like I was broken glass, unsure whether to sweep me up or try to glue me together. So I lied. I said I was fine, that things had just not worked out. I even smiled while saying it, as if that made it more convincing. But inside, I was unraveling. The worst part wasn't even missing her. It was realizing how easily I had let her go. Not fought, not chased, just surrendered. Like losing her was the logical conclusion to a story I'd written in my head where I always end up alone. That self-fulfilling prophecy clung to me like smoke. One night, I returned home to find a package outside my door. No return address. Inside was a small photo book, cheap, printed hastily, but unmistakably filled with snapshots of us. Her legs in my lap on the couch. my hand brushing her cheek in a blurry cafe shot. A Polaroid of her miff, eyes squinted, holding a melting ice cream cone. I hadn't taken most of the photos. She had. They were fragments she had captured in secret, moments I never realized were worth preserving. At the end of the book was a handwritten note. I thought maybe one day you'd want to remember. Or maybe forget, but with kindness. It didn't say who it was from, but it didn't have to. I held that note like it was evidence of something lost and sacred. For the first time, I didn't cry. I just sat with it, the weight of memory pressed against my chest like a hand refusing to let me breathe. I slept with that book beside me that night. And the night after. Eventually, it lived on my desk, not hidden but not on display either. Just there, waiting. Time moved. As it always does. I started seeing someone new, a woman named Lena. We met through a mutual friend, and she was the kind of person who asked deep questions without making them feel intrusive. She was quieter than Emma, more calculated, more methodical in the way she opened up. We dated casually at first. Drinks after work, walks through quiet neighborhoods, long talks about everything except our pasts. It was refreshing, easy. But I knew I wasn't fully present. I smiled, I listened, I kissed her goodnight. But a part of me was watching from the outside, like a movie I'd seen before and knew the ending too. Lena deserved more. One evening, as we sat on a bench watching the city lights reflect off the river, she turned to me and said, "You're not here, are you?" I didn't lie. I couldn't. I told her about Emma. Not all of it, not the raw pieces, but enough for her to understand. She nodded, not hurt, just resigned. "She's your unfinished chapter," she said. "Maybe we all have one." I thanked her for her honesty, and she thanked me for mine. That was our last date. After that, I stopped pretending I had moved on. I let myself linger in the grief, not wallow, but feel it without guilt. I began journaling again, not for anyone else, just for me. Short entries, scattered thoughts, letters to a woman who would never read them. And slowly, imperceptibly, the pain softened. Not vanished, just dulled into something I could carry. Months passed. One evening, I saw a post online. A friend of a friend had tagged Emma in a photo. She was standing near a lake, barefoot, holding a small child. A little girl, maybe 2 years old. Her hair curled in the same way Emma's used to when she slept on damp sheets. The caption said, "Family Weekend," and listed the names of 3 people, one of which I didn't recognize. My heart stopped, then raced, then settled into a rhythm of confusion and denial. Could it be? Could the child be hers? Ours? I counted the months backward, did the math. The timeline blurred with memory. We had been careful, or so I thought. But there had been that one night. The night she cried into my chest, whispering fears about being unwanted, about being replaceable. I remember holding her tighter, telling her no one could replace her. We didn't plan anything that night. We just let it happen. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through more photos, but there was nothing else. No clues, no captions that confirmed or denied. I stared at that little girl's face for hours, memorizing features, analyzing resemblances. Was I imagining it, projecting? Or was there something real in the curve of her smile, in the way her left eyebrow arched higher than the right? I couldn't sleep, I couldn't think. The next morning I emailed Emma, not to accuse, just to ask. The message was short, saw a photo. "I don't want to assume anything, but if I should know something, please tell me." I waited an hour, a day, a week, nothing, no reply. Then, almost 2 weeks later, I got a letter, a real one, handwritten. No return address again. "She's not yours." But for a moment, I wanted to pretend she could have been. "You were the last place I felt safe. The last place I believed in magic. I'm sorry for the silence. It wasn't meant to hurt you. I just didn't know how to stay in your world. And I couldn't ask you to come into mine. I hope you're happy, but truly." My hands gripped the paper tighter than they should have. Part of me felt relief. Another part, regret. But mostly, I felt empty. Not because she had a child. Not even because it wasn't mine. But because, for a moment, I had allowed myself to believe in a second chance that was never coming. And that belief, however fleeting, had brought back a version of me I hadn't seen in so long. A hopeful one. I didn't write back. There was nothing more to say. Some stories are meant to remain unfinished. Some loves, unspoken. But that doesn't make them any less real. That year, I moved apartments. Got rid of the French press, donated the art prints. Not out of bitterness, but because they belonged to a version of life that no longer fit. I kept the photo book, though. And the letter, they live in a drawer I rarely open, but I know exactly where they are. I still take the subway sometimes. Different route now, different destination. And sometimes I still think I see her, in reflections, in strangers, in fleeting glances. She's everywhere and nowhere, like a song you used to love but can't listen to anymore without falling apart. I've tried dating again. Some went well. Others fizzled. I'm better now. More present, more vulnerable, less afraid of saying what I feel. But I've learned something else too. Not every great love ends with a ring. Some just teach you how to love better the next time. If there is a next time. For now, I write. I wake up. I make my own coffee again, kettle and all. And sometimes, when the world feels too quiet, I close my eyes and remember her laugh echoing through my old apartment like wind through an open window. She was never mine to keep. But she was real. And sometimes that's enough. I don't remember the exact day it stopped hurting. Only that one morning I woke up and didn't reach for the drawer. The one where the letter and photo book lived. I didn't even think about it. My mind had finally gone silent, not from suppression, but from acceptance. It's a subtle difference, but you feel it when it happens. As if something inside you exhales after holding its breath for too long. I started doing things I hadn't done in years. I joined a book club, not out of loneliness, but out of genuine curiosity. I started running in the mornings, not to outrun my past, but to greet the day with motion. I changed my routine. New coffee shop, new route to work, new playlists that didn't remind me of her. Emma stopped being a ghost and became a memory. Still vivid, still tender, but no longer haunting. That's how I knew I was healing. Not when I forgot, but when remembering didn't destroy me. Then came Julia. I met her at a friend's engagement party. One of those gatherings where you expect to be surrounded by smug couples and wine, fueled nostalgia. I was prepared to leave early, already crafting excuses in my head. Early meeting, migraine, something vague yet convincing. But then she sat next to me on the garden steps outside, both of us escaping the noise inside. She offered me a strawberry from her plate. No introduction, no small talk, just a strawberry. And for some reason, that felt like the most intimate gesture anyone had made in months. We started talking, cautiously at first, like strangers measuring the temperature of the air before diving in. But the conversation stretched effortlessly. About books, about travel, about the strange beauty of starting over after your 20s have betrayed all your expectations. She wasn't like Emma. Where Emma was fire, Julia was rain. Soft, steady, quietly powerful. She didn't try to impress. She didn't push. She simply stayed, present in a way that felt anchoring. When she laughed, it wasn't an eruption. It was a melody. We exchanged numbers. I didn't text her that night. I waited 2 days, not out of games, but because I needed to be sure. I had promised myself I wouldn't stumble into something new just to escape what was old. But the thought of her lingered like a pleasant song stuck in my head. So I texted. She replied immediately. Our first date was at a botanical garden. Her choice. She liked places that made her feel small in a good way, she said. Like the universe was too big for petty problems. We walked for hours, barely touching, sharing stories like passing notes in class. She told me about her divorce. How she married too young, too fast, and how leaving wasn't the hardest part. Staying gone was. I told her about Emma. Not everything, not yet, but enough for her to see the outline of my scars. She didn't flinch, just nodded like she'd met ghosts too. That night ended with a hug, nothing more. But in that hug I felt something shift, a quiet trust. A beginning not forced but chosen. We started seeing each other regularly. Dinner, museums, walks in the rain. Julia loved rain. Said it made everything smell like new beginnings. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't before. Telling stories I had long buried. Letting someone see the version of me I used to protect like a fragile artifact. She never judged, never tried to fix me. Just listened. Her apartment was filled with plants and soft lighting and old jazz records. She loved Coltrane and Miles Davis, and sometimes she'd play them low while cooking barefoot in the kitchen, swaying slightly like the music whispered only to her. It was peaceful in a way that felt revolutionary. No drama, no hidden wounds bleeding onto the floor, just presence. One night, as we lay in bed, her head on my chest, she asked, "Do you believe people can love again the same way?" I paused, thinking of Emma, of the fire, of the loss. "No," I said. "But I think we can love better." She didn't say anything, just traced slow circles on my skin with her finger. We didn't need more words. The silence between us wasn't heavy. It was sacred. Months passed. Seasons changed. Julia and I became a rhythm. Not a whirlwind romance, but a steady flame. I introduced her to my friends. She took me to meet her parents. They were warm, curious, slightly overbearing in the charming way older people are. Her mother liked me. Her father asked too many questions. I passed the test. We planned a weekend getaway to a cabin by the lake. Just the two of us, no distractions. It was supposed to be simple, easy. But the past, I've learned, has a cruel sense of timing. We stopped at a roadside diner on the way. Small, charming, the kind of place with mismatched furniture and handwritten menace. As we waited for our food, I went to the restroom. When I returned, Julia's face had changed, not visibly upset, but distant, like she had retreated into herself. I asked if she was okay. She nodded. But her eyes said otherwise. "Who's Emma?" she asked softly, almost kindly. I froze. "What do you mean?" I managed. She pulled out her phone and turned the screen toward me. An old message I had drafted to Emma months ago, never sent, still sitting unsent in my email drafts. I must left my laptop open once. Julia had seen it. "Read it." "I wasn't snooping," she said quickly. "It popped up when I opened Gmail on your browser. I shouldn't have read it, I know. But I did." The air shifted. I felt exposed, like a diary cracked open mid-sentence. "I never sent it," I whispered. "I know," she said. "But you wrote it. That matters." We sat in silence, the clinking of forks around us suddenly loud. "Do you still love her?" The question hit harder than I expected, because the answer wasn't simple. I didn't love Emma the way I used to, but some part of me would always carry her. Not in a romantic way, not anymore, but in the way you carry a scar. Not painful, just permanent. "I love the version of me she awakened," I said slowly. "But I don't want to go back to that life. I want to build something new. With you." Julia looked down, nodding, her fingers curled around the edge of the table. "It's hard," she finally said. "To know someone was a chapter you didn't close properly. Some stories don't have endings," I replied. "Only pauses." "And what if I don't want to be a sequel?" she asked, eyes meeting mine. "What if I want to be the only story?" That question stayed with me long after we left the diner. Even as we laughed again, even as we lit a fire by the lake and toasted marshmallows, that question echoed in my head. Could I truly give her that? Could I promise her she was the only one when a part of me still lived in another room of my heart? I didn't have the answer, not then, but I wanted to find it for her, for us. The next morning, I woke up early while she was still asleep. The lake was misty, the kind of stillness that makes everything feel suspended in time. I took out my phone and deleted the draft. Not as a gesture, not as proof, but because I finally understood. I didn't need to hold on to Emma anymore to honor what we had. Letting go wasn't betrayal. It was gratitude. And in that quiet act, I freed myself. When Julia woke, I made us coffee and watched the way her eyes crinkled as she smiled at me, unaware of the shift that had just taken place. I didn't tell her about the deletion. I didn't make a grand speech. I just kissed her forehead and held her a little tighter. Some things don't need to be said. They need to be lived. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't haunted. I was here, present, ready. Maybe love doesn't come once. Maybe it comes when you finally learn how to carry it without breaking. There's a certain kind of peace that creeps in unnoticed. It doesn't crash through the door or announce itself with fanfare. It's quiet, subtle. You only realize it's there when the panic doesn't rise the way it used to, when your heart doesn't race over an unsent text or an unanswered question. That's how life with Julia began to feel. Not the desperate, fiery chaos of Emma, but a slow burn that warmed the corners of my life I hadn't even realized were cold. We developed rituals. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, evenings with jazz records and lazy cooking, quiet Sunday walks with no destination. For the first time, love wasn't about fixing each other or surviving storms. It was about witnessing each other, standing side by side without needing to fill every silence or solve every fear. Julia had a way of grounding me. Where I once sought escape in work, I now found rest in her presence. She didn't pull me into her world. She made space for me in it. And I, in turn, did something I'd never truly done before. I built a space for her in mine. I moved out of my old apartment, not because it was haunted with memories, but because I needed a new canvas, a place we could create from scratch. We found a modest flat with creaky floorboards and too much light in the mornings. The kind of place that needed fixing but held charm in its imperfections. Like us. We painted the walls together, arguing over colors in the paint easel like it mattered. We filled the shelves with books we both loved and some we promised we'd eventually read. Her plants came too, of course. They always thrived near her. One ivy crept along the windowsill like it was reaching for the sun. And every time I saw it, I thought of Julia. Steady. Growing. Reaching without rushing. Life settled into a rhythm, but beneath that calm I carried a quiet unease. Not because I doubted us, but because things were finally, undeniably good. And for someone who'd spent years expecting the ground to fall out beneath him, happiness felt suspicious. That feeling grew when I noticed Julia pulling away in small, imperceptible ways. A pause before answering, a distracted gaze during dinner. A quietness that wasn't peaceful anymore. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't want to return to old habits. Overanalyzing, confronting shadows before they existed. But it lingered. One evening after a long day, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone. "Everything okay?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. But her eyes betrayed her. I waited. She finally looked up. "My ex-husband messaged me," she said, voice calm, almost rehearsed. "He wants to talk." The words settled between us like ash. Not a fire, but the aftermath of one. I nodded, trying to keep my face neutral. "What does he want?" "Closure," she said. "Or so he says." "And do you want to talk to him?" Another pause. "I don't know. Part of me feels like I should. Not because I have feelings for him, but because I never really said goodbye." I swallowed hard. "Then talk to him, if that's what you need." She nodded again, grateful, maybe even surprised. But as she left the room to call him in private, I felt something break open inside me. Not jealousy, not anger. Fear. Fear that I was someone's next unfinished chapter. That even as I stood beside her, she might already be halfway out the door in her mind. I sat alone in the kitchen that night, sipping lukewarm tea, staring at the same ivy that used to comfort me. And for the first time in months, I felt that old H return. The H of uncertainty, of not being enough. She came back an hour later, quiet but composed. "It's done," she said. "Really done?" I needed to hear myself say it out loud. I nodded, unsure what to say. She sat across from me and reached for my hand. "You not him?" she said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." And I believed her. But belief doesn't erase fear. It just teaches you to keep walking anyway. In the weeks that followed, things returned to normal, at least on the surface. We smiled, we kissed, we made plans. But something had shifted. Not between us, but inside me. I became more aware of every moment, every gesture. I tried harder. More spontaneous surprises, more intentional conversations, more effort to be present even on the bad days. It wasn't desperation, it was clarity. I knew what I had, and I refused to lose it through complacency. Julia noticed. One night, as we lay beneath a blanket of stars on our tiny balcony, she turned to me and said, "You've changed." "Good or bad?" I asked. "Good," she said. "But it feels like you're waiting for the sky to fall." I sighed. "Maybe I am." She sat up, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Then let's build something so strong it doesn't matter if it does." That was Julia, never denying the storm, just choosing to anchor through it. A few months later, we traveled to Portugal. A spontaneous trip born from a whim and a cheap flight alert. Lisbon was golden and hilly, its streets winding like secrets. We got lost often, intentionally. We ate too much, drank local wine on rooftops, danced badly to music we didn't understand. One afternoon, we visited a small gallery tucked behind a row of ivy-covered buildings. And that's where everything tilted. I was admiring a photograph. Black and white, two lovers in a downpour, faces blurred but unmistakably in love. Then I heard her voice, not Julia's. I turned, and there she was, standing 3 feet away, holding a child's hand. A little girl, the same one from the photo all those months ago. My chest clenched. She hadn't seen me yet. She was looking at a painting, explaining it to the child in that animated way she used to explain books to me. My legs moved before my brain did. I tapped her shoulder. She turned. Time slowed. Her eyes widened, then softened. "You," she said. I nodded. "He." Julia appeared beside me, sensing the shift. Emma looked at her, then at me, then back at the child. "This is my daughter, Clara," she said. The little girl smiled slightly. I crouched slightly. "Clara," she giggled, hiding behind Emma's leg. "She's beautiful," I said, standing. Emma smiled, and for a moment it was like old times. Then Julia gently took my hand. Emma noticed. She extended hers. "I'm Emma." Julia shook it. Julia. The air was thick with unspoken things. After a few minutes of polite conversation, Emma said they had to go. As she walked away, she turned back. "I'm glad you're doing okay," she said. I nodded. "You too." And just like that, she was gone again. But this time I didn't feel gutted. I felt grateful for the closure I didn't even know I needed. Julia squeezed my hand. "Was that her?" I nodded. "She's a chapter. But you're the whole book." That night, back at our airbum, I wrote for the first time in weeks. Pages poured out of me. Not about Emma, not about loss, but about hope, about new beginnings, about how sometimes life gives you the goodbye you needed long after you stopped waiting for it. I didn't show it to Julia, not yet, but I held her a little tighter that night, and in the quiet that followed, I realized something profound. Emma had taught me how to feel. Julia taught me how to stay. And maybe, just maybe, I was finally ready to write a story that didn't end in silence. The return from Lisbon felt like the end of a season in our lives, the final scene of a film that had just enough resolution to let the credits roll without regret. Back in our apartment, everything felt familiar yet altered. Subtly brighter, as though our time away had cracked open a window neither of us knew we needed. Julia and I fell back into routine, but with a softness we hadn't had before. Our movements were more fluid, our laughter warmer, the silences more reassuring. There was a new layer of understanding between us now, invisible but present in the way she'd reach for my hand without looking or the way I'd pause mid-sentence just to watch her expression. It wasn't just love anymore. It was partnership, the kind built not on fairy tales, but on the quiet aftermath of truth. I found myself waking earlier than usual. At first, I thought it was just jet lag, but it lingered. So I embraced it. I began journaling every morning before the city stirred, before Julia emerged wrapped in sleep and sunlight. I didn't write about Emma anymore. I wrote about the present, about the way Julia's feet searched for mine beneath the covers, the way her plant in the kitchen had sprouted 2 new leaves while we were away, the way I had started to hum without realizing it. Healing doesn't always announce itself with grand gestures. Sometimes it's a new leaf, a morning hum, A cup of coffee poured before the other even asks. But peace has a way of drawing attention to what you still fear. And for me, that fear was stillness. Because stillness, in my history, had always been a prelude to something breaking. That fear became harder to ignore when Julia began working late more often. She'd always been diligent, dedicated to her work in community development, planning local initiatives and outreach programs. But now she came home tired, distracted, her eyes dimmer than usual. I didn't question it at first. I didn't want to be the man who hovered, who assumed. But the more I noticed her retreating into her phone, checking emails in the middle of dinner, whispering names I didn't recognize during late-night calls, the more I felt that familiar weight creep back in. I told myself I trusted her, and I did. But trust doesn't erase the echo of past betrayals. It only quiets it, and even then, not always. One evening, I found her asleep on the couch, her laptop open beside her. I went to close it but hesitated. The screen displayed an email. Not scandalous, not romantic, just unusual. The subject line read, R.E. Proposal for Joint Initiative, Marek. I wasn't the jealous type, but the name caught me, Marek. It appeared frequently now in texts and conversations. I'd asked about him once, casually. She said he was a collaborator, someone heading a new regional partnership. That was it? I never pushed further, but now I wondered, not out of suspicion, but curiosity. Was I being shut out again? I closed the laptop, covered her with a blanket, and sat beside her for a long time, watching the way her brow furrowed even in sleep. The next morning, I asked, "Is everything okay with work?" She nodded too quickly. "Just busy. New projects. Budget deadlines." "You've mentioned Marek a few times." She paused, then smiled faintly. "He's leading a cross-city campaign on youth development. We're aligning our programs. You seem close." "Oh, not close," she said carefully. "Just connected by necessity." I nodded, but the answer didn't settle right in my chest. Not because I thought she was lying, but because something was being held back. That night, she didn't come home for dinner. She texted late, said the meeting had gone long, and that she was staying at a hotel near the conference center to avoid the commute. Logical. Reasonable. But I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat with the discomfort, the unease, and the ghost of a memory I'd rather forget. The next morning, I decided to visit her. Not to catch her. Not to interrogate. Just to see her. I picked up her favorite pastries from the corner bakery, the ones with too much powdered sugar, and took the train toward the hotel she mentioned. When I arrived, I asked at the desk for her room number, claiming I had a delivery. The clerk smiled and pointed me to the cafe next door. "She and Mr. Marek are finishing breakfast there," he said. My stomach tightened. I walked over, each step a tug of war between rationality and dread. Through the glass window of the cafe, I saw them. Seated close, not intimate, but definitely absorbed in conversation. She looked animated, her hands moving expressively. He was watching her closely, the way someone listens not just with ears, but with eyes. I stood there unsure what to do. Then she looked up and saw me. Her face changed instantly. Not guilt, not fear, just surprise. She stood, walked toward the door, and stepped outside. "Hey," she said, slightly breathless. "What are you doing here?" I held up the pastry bag, forcing a smile. "Brought breakfast. Thought I'd surprise you." She looked at the bag, then at me, her face softening. "That's sweet. But you didn't have to." "I know," I said. "I wanted to." A pause stretched between us. "Want to join us?" she offered. I shook my head. "No, I should go. Just wanted to see you." She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. "It's fine," I said too quickly. "We'll talk at home." Then I turned and walked away, feeling her eyes on my back the whole time. That night, she came home early. The silence between us was different now. Not safe, not sacred. Tense, heavy. "I'm not cheating on you," she said plainly. "I know," I replied. "But you are pulling away." She sat beside me. "It's not because of you, it's me. I'm overwhelmed. I took on too much." I didn't know how to say it without sounding like I was failing. I nodded, but something inside me didn't believe her entirely. Or maybe I believed her, but knew it wasn't the full truth. "Do you have feelings for him?" I asked, my voice barely audible. She didn't answer right away. And in that pause, everything shifted. "I don't know," she said finally. "It's not love, but I feel seen in a way I haven't felt lately. And I hate that, because you see me too. Just differently." I swallowed hard. "Do you want to leave?" Her eyes filled with tears. "No, I want to find a way back. But I don't know how if I'm being pulled in two directions." The next few days were excruciating. We talked less, touched less, avoided the hard parts. I tried to act normal. She tried to be present, but the fracture had formed, and no amount of paint or pastries could cover it. One evening, I returned home to find her sitting on the floor, surrounded by half-packed boxes. "What is this?" I asked. She looked up, eyes red. "I need space. Not forever, just for now." I sank to my knees. "Julia, please," she interrupted, voice trembling. "Don't make this harder. I'm not choosing him. I'm choosing myself. For a while." She moved out that weekend. No dramatic goodbye, no shouting. Just a quiet departure. And then she was gone. The apartment felt cavernous without her. Every room echoed. The plants began to wither. I didn't water them. I couldn't. They reminded me too much of her. For weeks, I did nothing. Just drifted. Until one morning, I woke up and watered the ivy. Not because I believed she'd come back, but because I had to start somewhere. Life doesn't collapse all at once. It crumbles piece by piece. And healing works the same way. I didn't know if she'd return. I didn't even know if I wanted her to. But I knew this: I had loved her fully. Honestly. Without armor. And maybe that would be enough. Even if it ended. Even if I had to start over again. Because sometimes loving someone isn't about forever. Sometimes it's about showing yourself that you still can. They say healing is not a destination. It's a rhythm. One you fall into and stumble out of, over and over, until eventually you realize you're no longer stumbling. You're walking, and one morning, not unlike any other, you realize the weight you've been carrying has quietly gone light. That's how it happened for me. No epiphany. No final letter or teary reunion, just the quiet unfolding of days in her absence. Julia was gone. The apartment remained. Her plants still lived here, some clinging, some dying. I let the ivy crawl further across the windowsill. For the first few weeks after she left, I couldn't decide if I was angry or numb. I kept playing our last conversation in my head, like a scratched record that always skipped at the same word space. It sounded so neutral, so reasonable, but the way it gutted me felt anything but. I didn't call her. I didn't write, not out of pride, not even pain, but because I had finally learned something no one ever teaches you. Sometimes love means letting someone leave without chasing. Sometimes love respects the door as much as it longs for the return. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful this time. It was dense. Like fog. I went back to work, though I struggled to concentrate. My edits were clumsy, my comments mechanical. Colleagues noticed, but no one asked. I guess that's the hidden blessing of professionalism. It lets you grieve in plain sight without explanation. Outside of work, I stayed busy. I visited bookstores, browsed for titles I wouldn't read. I went to parks and sat on benches, watching couples and wondering how many of them were pretending they weren't slowly falling apart. One evening, I walked past the cafe where I first saw Julia. It had changed. New lights, new name. The world kept spinning, indifferent. I began volunteering at a youth writing center. It was Julia's old project, the one she'd dreamed about expanding. I didn't do it to feel close to her. At least, that's what I told myself. But something about helping young people find words for what they didn't know how to say felt like redemption. Like maybe I could teach them to speak before they, too, learned to swallow silence. There was a boy named Elijah, 14. Quiet. Wrote with a kind of rawness that startled me. One day he asked, "Have you ever lost someone without them dying?" I looked at him, stunned. "Yes," I said. "How do you move on?" he asked. I paused, then replied, by choosing to remember what they gave you without resenting them for not staying. He nodded, scribbled something in his notebook, and never brought it up again. Winter arrived quietly. The first snow fell while I was walking home alone, no destination, just motion. I watched the flakes dissolve on my coat, thought about how they vanished the second you touched them. That's how it felt with Julia. One moment solid, the next gone. But something inside me had changed since she left. I no longer needed her return to make sense of her departure. I could hold both, what we had and what we lost, with equal grace. The journal I'd once filled with longing now held reflections, fragments of clarity. Pages not written to or for her, but for me. It was during one of these mornings, as I wrote with a mug of black coffee steaming beside me, that I received the message. Simple. Unexpected. Can we talk, Julia? My fingers hovered above the screen, then typed back, Wes. She suggested the same cafe where we'd had our first real conversation. I agreed. When I arrived, she was already there. Same coat, same calm posture, but her eyes had changed. A little warier, a little more knowing. She smiled when she saw me. Not the radiant grin I remembered, but something gentler, more careful. I sat across from her, hands folded on the table. We didn't speak at first, just studied each other like strangers trying to find traces of someone they used to know. Finally, she broke the silence. I've been away, not just physically. In my head, in my life. I nodded. I know. She looked down at her tea. I thought I needed space to figure out what I wanted. But it turns out, I needed space to realize what I already had. I said nothing. Not out of cruelty, but because I didn't want to rush her confession. It was her moment, not mine. I didn't choose Marek, she continued. There was never anything there beyond emotional projection. I was exhausted. And instead of turning to you, I panicked. I fell into old habits, run before being abandoned. Create the ending before someone else does. I finally spoke. I wasn't going to leave you, Julia. I know, she whispered, but that made it even scarier, because it meant I had something real to lose. Another pause. Then, I've been in therapy. It's helped. I smiled faintly. Good. She looked up straight into me. Do you hate me? No, I said. I hurt, but I don't hate. I don't expect us to go back to how it was, she said. I wanted you to know that you love me the way no one ever has. And I'm sorry I couldn't hold that when it mattered most. I took a deep breath. I loved you fully. That doesn't mean I want to start over, but I'll always be grateful for what we built. She nodded, eyes shimmering. I just needed you to hear it. Not for closure, but because truth deserves to be spoken even if it's late. But we parted with a hug, not tight, not rushed, just honest. And then we walked away, separately. Weeks passed, winter deepened. One night, I stood by my window watching snow fall in lazy spirals and felt an unexpected lightness. Not joy, not sadness, just presence. I turned to my desk, opened a fresh journal, and began writing something new. Not about Emma, not about Julia, but about a man who had finally stopped being haunted by his past because he had chosen to befriend it instead. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a local literature event. Something small, intimate. The kind of thing I would have declined a year ago. But this time, I said yes. I stood before a modest crowd and read from a piece I hadn't shared with anyone. A short essay called, When Silence Meant Everything. I spoke about love, about leaving, about the sacred weight of words unspoken, and when I finished, there was no applause, just stillness. The good kind. The kind that feels like understanding. Afterward, as I packed my notes, a woman approached. She looked to be in her late 20s, nervous smile. Your story, she said. It felt like mine. Thank you. I nodded, unsure what else to say. But something clicked in that moment. Not attraction. Not romance. Just connection. A reminder that we're all walking through something, and that sometimes, sharing your heartbreak becomes someone else's blueprint for healing. I never saw Julia again. At least not in person. But sometimes, when I pass our old places or hear Miles Davis on the radio, I smile. not with longing, but with gratitude. Because she helped me grow. She helped me love. She helped me fail in a way that didn't break me, but rebuilt me. And Emma, well, she was the spark. The beginning. The lesson I didn't know I needed. Now, I live differently. I speak when things hurt. I stay when it's hard. I choose people who choose me back fully. And most of all, I've learned to honor the silence. Not as punishment, but as proof. That something once mattered. That something once lived. That something, someone, once taught me that even endings can be beautiful if we're brave enough to see them as beginnings. Because sometimes the truest love story isn't the one where they come back. It's the one where you find your way forward without them. And that's when silence means everything. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.